Hello and welcome to Stories and Facilitating Software Design and Architecture. My name is Andrea Magnorsky, and today we're here to listen a story from Evelyn van Kelle. As usual, we're here with our co-conspirator, Kenny Schrecker. And so, Evelyn, please take it away. Yeah, thanks. And thank you for inviting me because I'm really enthusiastic about this initiative. So when Andrea and Kelly, when you asked me to think about examples or to share some story about situations where I learned a lot when it comes to facilitation, I really had a hard time picking one, to be honest, because there's really a lot to choose from, right? And there are different situations where you learn a lot and where you learn also your own heuristics in that sense. So I am very much busy with observing behavior in these kind of declarative modeling sessions as well that I facilitate. And then you start to observe a lot of behavioral patterns that learn you a lot as well as a facilitator. And so when I started to dig my memory and try to select a story, I decided that I would go with an example that gave me personally probably the most intense physical reaction. Because usually when I have a very physical reaction to a situation, that means that there's something to learn. So that's also kind of a heuristic for myself. And so, well, then it's not coincidental that this example also had a pretty big impact on me. It stayed with me. I learned a lot from it. And specifically, I learned a lot about the impact of ranking and understanding, or at least trying to understand dominant behavior in these kind of sessions. So let me take you to this story, to the situation. We're going back to an EventStorming session that I facilitated together with a colleague. And this is already, it's years ago. So I basically, actually, I just started with the whole facilitation journey. So this was kind of a very nice thing to experience in your early days. So this company where we did this was really going through a lot of major changes. There was a lot of uncertainty within the company, and that translated also to people being afraid of making any decisions. So there weren't a lot of decisions made. They were pointing fingers to each other. There was very much this transactional leadership. So you do something for me, I do something for you. And hierarchy was very, very present in these daily operations. So in daily meetings, it was mostly people that were very high in rank or high up in the hierarchy that were speaking most and telling people what to do. People were looking at them. So ranks were very much played in this organization. So I was already there for a few weeks. And then we decided, hey, maybe we should do this event storming session because we can think it will add value for your company. We had a very rough time convincing leadership that that was the case and that it wasn't just a wasted day, as it was called by some of the leaders in that group, because that day could also be spent on real work. So you can imagine that this was a rough start that we had there. And the reaction of leadership also made that the participants of this session were very hesitant to join and to actually express ideas and opinions because, well, why are we here? Should we be here? Shouldn't we do something else? So there was this uncertainty throughout. And we noticed that in the session as well. Conversations didn't really take off. Everything stayed very high level during the event story session. There were no disagreements, which for me is a red flag because, well, if there are no disagreements at all, then that usually is a sign that we are not dealing with what's underneath the waterline or what's in the shadows, as we call it in our book. There were always no hotspots added to the event storming. Everyone was on the same page. And what very much stood out was that everyone was asking for approval, even to move a sticky to specific people in that room. And it turned out that these people were also pretty high up in rank, but this was the situation that we were dealing with during that event storm. And as facilitators, we had to work very hard. We had to work very hard to get some things going, to get people and cities moving around. And usually that is also a heuristic for us. If you, as a facilitator, find yourself working very hard, then something is up. Something is up. And I don't want to say wrong, but something is going on that you probably want to dig in. And honestly, I got frustrated in that session because I felt like I could not make an impact and that I was proving leadership and their resistance right. And that really hit me. So I really find that very annoying. So yeah, we were very determined to get a breakthrough in that session. We decided that we should intervene more than usual, probably with sense-making exercises as well, trying to get some of the implicit explicit, so making the shadows visible, in other words. So yeah, we could feel that there was a lot going on in the shadows. We could observe it in the behavior of the people that were participating, but it really felt, as a facilitator, it kind of felt like my flashlight wasn't working. So I couldn't really shine a light on these shadows and not really see what's going on and make that explicit. So this is also when I decided to apply one of my own heuristics. Like when I don't feel in control, I stand back literally and I just start to observe what's happening. And that's also when I started to observe more of the behavioral patterns that I also linked to ranking. Um, One thing to add to the situation, which this was setting the scene, so this was the case. What also was present in the situation, we had a CPO in that organization that, as I said, was part of the leadership and not really a big fan of this day and this event storm taking place. And his role in the session, we invited him, of course, but he had other things to do, and there was more important work to do, and so he wasn't going to make it all day. What he did do throughout the day was he walked in every now and then. He walked in every now and then in the session, and basically to check how things were going without actively participating himself. So he walked in, he had a look at the event store, at the brown paper. He observed the people for a while without saying anything, just standing there with his hands folded like this. And and then he walked out. So sometimes he made a comment, sometimes he said something, or he made a sarcastic comment. Usually he didn't ask any questions, but that's what he did. And every time that he walked in, I noticed the physical reaction in myself. I got tense, my shoulders got tense, my breath got to my throat, and I started to feel nervous and started to sweat in a way. And I also noticed that it did something to the group that was there, because every time he walked in, it kind of stopped. So people stopped writing on stickies, stopped sharing opinions, stopped sharing anything, basically. No stickies were created. The whole thing stopped. Then the grand finale happened, because one of the last times that he walked into the room, that was actually in the middle of the sense-making exercise. And the sense-making exercise is aimed to, at least make sense of the situation. So what's going on? Where are we? How do we feel about certain topics? How does the group feel about certain topics? And how are the opinions or the interpretations of stuff? How is that like divided in a way? So it can be a pretty vulnerable exercise to do. And we were in the middle of that sense-making exercise. For the first time in that day, there was actually one person who was sharing something vulnerable. And it really felt like a breakthrough for us as facilitators. But then the CTO walked in and we could really feel the energy change again. So he took place in the circle because we were standing in a circle. And then this one person was brave enough to continue with that story, sharing the concerns and the thoughts and the insecurity that they had in this session. And the CTO looked and he listened. And after a few seconds of silence, he started to slow clap. He really did that. And that's when the physical reaction in me peaked, not just with me, what I could observe, but this is really where I felt the physical reaction peaking in myself and my back. Okay, I need to do something with this, because this is, okay, yes, I can learn a lot, but yes, this is something where I could act. Because I'm a facilitator, people are looking at you. The CTO walked out of the room and the group was standing there in silence, looking for us, my co-facilitator and then myself. And we were overwhelmed as well. So I figured that the best thing to do at that point would just be to make that explicit, share what that did with me in that moment. So I also shared my feelings and the physical reaction that I got, and admitting that I did not have an answer at that point on how to continue. That it made me feel unsafe, that it made me feel defensive. And those are feelings that I don't really like. So the other facilitator did the same thing, shared the vulnerabilities and the insecurities and the unsafe feelings. Then we took a break and we decided that we asked the group, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue or do you want to stop here? And the group decided that they wanted to continue. So we did. We also did some sort of a sense-making exercise for people that wanted to share something about the situation, and we got something back. So I think it was good in hindsight, but the impact that this behavior had on the group, that was really, really intense. So it was a very, very interesting situation at that point in hindsight, because in that moment, of course, it was not interesting at all, because it just made me feel unsafe and insecure and and I was like, oh, but I'm also responsible for this group. So what should we do? And I think what I learned from it mostly is that this behavior can really have an effect on the group, especially if the conditions are already not optimal in terms of safety and how people want to share stuff. I also learned, again, if I get a physical reaction, I should do something because that's a moment where I should act and can make an impact on the situation. I also learned that despite my interpretation and my judgment of this behavior of this person, it is my job to stay objective and stay neutral, or at least act neutral in a way, and try to understand where this behavior is coming from. I also learned that from behavioral science, where I have a background in. It's important to understand, or at least try to understand where it's coming from, because only then you can make an attempt in changing that behavior. I never do that during a session because I don't want to put people on the spot. But I did learn, okay, if I feel triggered by certain behavior, then that's a cue for me that I need to dig into that behavior and ask questions to that person and try to figure out, why is this person showing this behavior? What is it bringing him or her or them? Because if you show certain behavior, it always brings something to you. Despite what others might think, it's beneficial for you in a way. And I need to know what that beneficial consequence is for that person by showing that behavior. So I learned a lot in that session. It cost me a couple of sleepless nights afterwards. That was also the case. But I think every facilitator will come into a situation where they find themselves facing behavior that they don't like, that they get triggered by, that they feel like, all right, what should I do? And it's hindering the group. So I think it's a it's a situation we all will get to. And you can learn a lot from it. So I think that was the example that I wanted to share in this session.
Thanks. So the first thing that popped in mind is, on the one hand, leadership wasn't really a fan of this, but it will help them. And that's a very related, at least for me, that's a very related thing. You say, well, this can really help them, but leadership isn't in place. So in hindsight, would you think you would still do that session?
I think I would have done it in a different way, to be honest. I don't think I would have done it in this way, because indeed it also felt like we were trying to convince them that this would be valuable. And I don't think that's the best approach. What I would do now in hindsight, because I was already there in the organization, right? So I had access is not the right word, but I was already collaborating with all of these people there. So I think I would just do it in a more like guerrilla kind of way, like within the group, whenever we had a session, just start modeling out things collaboratively without making it a huge session and making it a big thing also for leadership. So making it more part of the business as usual in a sense, and just try to experiment with this way of working together, because now it became maybe too big in a way. Yeah. It sounds like very emotionally charged, the whole thing. And I kind of wondered, as you were there, do you have any exercises that you do to regulate your emotions? Like some kind of your own, okay, now I breathe this way. I would say these words first just to give you, take you to your body and to people that you're trying to create safety. Do you have any kind of tricks like that? Or, yeah. I think for myself personally, whenever I feel that happening, I literally take a step back, usually just to try to breathe, take some distance and just observing what's happening. Because I also know when I get a physical reaction, my vision gets blurry. So I probably see things that are not there or that are only there for me. So taking a step back is something, but I also, whenever I feel like I'm not the only one, it's also, or I observe that I'm not the only one, it's also worth it to throw in a sense making exercise that is really aimed at just making feelings or physical reactions explicit also to the rest of the group. So seeing, hey, am I the only one? Or is anyone recognizing what I'm experiencing? And just by asking the simple question, does anyone recognize this when I share something about what it's doing to me? That's already a very powerful thing, because the rest of the group can also like, yeah, I recognize some parts of it. Now you don't have to recognize all of it, but at least, I can relate. And that like creates a bond with the group as well. So that's also a technique that you could use.
Yeah. Did you ever, you said you worked for the company, like, did you ever talk to the CTO about his behavior and how destructive that actually was?
Yes.
Once you calmed down afterwards?
Yes, I absolutely did, or at least I've tried. I think that's the best way, because indeed, like as I said, it was a trigger for me to at least try to understand the behavior. So why did it happen? And I don't want to do that in a group. I only want to do that one-on-one. So indeed, I initiated that conversation, and my goal there was to share my observations, share what it did to me, and then just let him talk and ask questions. Not saying like, "Hey, this is what you did wrong," or "Hey, this was very destructive to the session, and you shouldn't do that again." Asking questions, trying to understand where the behavior was coming from. I never got a full, real conversation. At least it didn't feel like it. But what I did get from him after the more superficial answers, like, yeah, but that people shouldn't take it that seriously. And yeah, you know how people can get. And after a while, what I did notice was that he was feeling a lot of pressure from everyone in his team, and that this kind of behavior was actually behavior that when you shared that with the rest of the group, that you would get compliments for. From that perspective, I understand, like for him at that point, that was behavior that would bring him something, and that something was more important than the progress of the group at that point. So we didn't really get to the bottom of it, because he also kept his guards up in a way. But that is indeed like my strategy, going to that person one-on-one, trying to explain what's behind it. And then the most difficult part of that is to leave my own judgments out of that, because of course I was judging everything that was happening there. Yeah.
You said something else when you were explaining your position. You said, I need to, as a facilitator, I'm paraphrasing, you need, as a facilitator, I need to remain neutral. And I'm curious about that. Why do you think that that's the case?
Yeah, or at least act neutral. So I don't think I can be fully neutral, because I wasn't, of course, but I need to act neutral in a way, because I think if I would just let my emotions and my judgments and opinions roam free in that way, and also participants in that session look at you as someone who's probably higher in rank because you are a facilitator, and that means that they will follow your lead. And whenever I set the tone by saying, for example, hey, this was ridiculous, or this was whatever word you would give to that, then it would be very hard for people who might have another opinion or would want to share something else, share, because I already set the stage with my opinion and my judgment. So by acting neutral, I hope to give the rest of the group also the opportunity to share how they feel without me just leading the way and setting the tone for everyone else. That's what I want to avoid. But that was very hard in that moment.
Also, it is very hard because you later shared that you shared your feelings first after the session, which I think was a good thing. So sometimes as a facilitator, yes, we want to act neutral, but sometimes also the group expect you to start first, so you can also set a stage in a way in a rank, right? So that it's very hard. It's you all. I still find it very hard when to talk first, when to leave the group. That's very.
But I think that the main thing there was that there was a break in between. So my first emotional reaction, I didn't like that. That didn't really happen because the guy walked out and we were like, okay, let's take a break. And then when the group came back, I was like, okay, we need to address it. And I could talk about how I felt and my insecurities and my feelings of unsafety in a more calm manner, let's say, and then inviting the rest of the group to do the same if they wanted. So I think that first emotional reaction, we skipped that. And I think that was the most neutral I could act in that sense.
So one thing, so we wrote the book together, Hien, you and me, and you were talking about shadows. The metaphor, I actually never thought about this, but you said something very interesting. So you were talking about the shadows and you're trying to find out the shadows. But as you were talking, I was actually thinking people in higher rank can actually overshadow the other shadows in this way. So I've never thought about it. And I think that's happened. So someone in the room, and I think every time we talk with people about this, there's two types of dominant people. There's the dominant one and there's the silent one. I think the dominant one will actually overshadow. So you cannot literally see the other people's thoughts in the overshadowing. So how would you now deal with that if there is someone overshadowing the rest of the group?
Yeah, like there are a lot of factors at play there, right? So how you could deal with that. So first of all, I would try to figure out if it's only hindering me or if it's hindering the group, because that's also something as a facilitator, right? Sometimes you feel like something is hindering the session or the outcomes, but it's only hindering you. The rest of the group doesn't see it. That's a problem. Sense making exercises could work for that, or just having conversations and breaks with people just to figuring out, is this my problem or is it a group problem? If it's a group problem, I think I would have tried to address the CTO in this sense earlier and hope to avoid that grand finale that we had with him. So maybe whenever he walked in, like in the middle of the day, say, hey, do you have time for a quick coffee? And then have a one-on-one conversation with him on my observations of the group, what it did, and maybe like asking him, hey, what do you hope to achieve with the session today? And then trying to do that reflection a bit sooner and avoid what we ended up with. I think that would be worth an attempt. On the other hand, I don't know if you can prevent everything in situations like this. When you were organizing the workshop, like just before the workshop, did you have a stated goal as to well, you'd have a whole day. Generally, you would have some sort of like, we're trying to, like, what did you tell people you were doing, and what was your goal? Maybe they were slightly different. Yeah, we had multiple conversations already with both the team and the leadership, because they didn't really mix in a way, which was already a sign, I think, or at least a signal that something could change. But we did have a lot of conversation because, as I said, they were going through major changes, and there were specific parts of the company that were going through also through very technical changes and process changes, and therefore also people changes, of course. So they wanted to get, as they stated it, they wanted to get a clear overview of the situation right now so that they could decide how things should change for the better in the future, given the goals that they had as an organization. So I thought, well, collaborative modeling could be a very nice tool for you guys to use. And hey, you'll have two experts in facilitation that can help you with that. The group was pretty much right away very in favor of doing this. They were like, yes, this could help us. But leadership really only asked questions, which is also a sign or signal about like, yeah, but how much time will that cost? And what does that mean for reaching our deadlines? Or what does that mean for the backlog? Or like that sort of questions. They were more focused on what it would cost, and the group or the team was more focused on what it would bring. So those two perspectives didn't really align in a way. And that was kind of where it went wrong, I think. Yes, thank you very much, Evelyn, and everyone, for your questions, comments, and everything. We also learned a lot. I think we have a few nice heuristics. Thank you, Evelyn. And see you next time on the next episode of Facilitating Stories of Software Design Architecture. Thank you.